So that's one thing to know about that video of what happened that day in Coral Gables. The guy shooting the video, the guy screaming at Nancy Pelosi, filming people pounding on the door to try to intimidate her, saying the Proud Boys are there. That guy is now in prison for trying to overthrow the U.S. government. But the other thing to know about that video is that the guy who he's actually filming doing the pounding on the door, this guy right here in the red circle, he has just been named by Donald Trump as his choice to be the next U.S. ambassador to the nation of Panama. Because apparently that is what our country is looking for in an ambassador now. Will you make yourself a physical menace for Donald Trump? Now, that man who's now Donald Trump's ambassador pick, after this happened in Coral Gables, he later defended his conduct there, saying he was just exercising his right to protest. At the time it happened, though, in 2018, Republicans were quite embarrassed by this. The head of the Miami-Dade Republican Party apologized for being there, distanced himself from the Proud Boys. Other Republicans, including Florida Senator Marco Rubio, condemned the action, said Republicans should never do anything physically intimidating like this. Well, now Marco Rubio is about to be nominated to be Donald Trump's Secretary of State, where the guy pounding bloody murder on the door to try to scare Nancy Pelosi and smiling up at Enrique Tarrio when he says, it's the Proud Boys in here, that guy will be reporting to Marco Rubio as one of America's next U.S. ambassadors. And the reason that's repellent, the reason that it's sort of instinctually repulsive to us is because there's supposed to be a sharp line that keeps violent intimidation on one side of the line and politics on the other, and never the twain shall meet. In a democratic country, those things are supposed to be separate. And so today, January 6th, the certification of the last presidential election happened in Washington, and it just happened ministerially and ceremonially like it's supposed to. And that contrast with what happened today versus what happened 4 years ago makes clear the profound difference between the two parties, right? Had Democrats won the presidential election this year, the whole country openly expected and was preparing for Republicans to go into violent, if not armed, revolt. But because instead Republicans won, everyone expected, and in fact we saw today, that Democrats would peacefully accept and participate in the transfer of power. And when a whole country expects guaranteed violence if one side loses in an electoral contest, then the two political parties in that contest are no longer competing in democratic terms anymore. One of those parties is a small d and capital D Democratic Party. The other party is something else. So that is part of what we are contending with on this January 6th. How do we ever get our democracy back now? Because we have, in effect, lost it. How do we ever get back to competition in democratic terms? Which means specifically, how do we get the Republican Party and the Trumpist right to no longer see physical force and armed conflict as the way they're going to get their way and hold power? One big step backwards from that as a goal will be Trump's promised pardons of the people who committed violence in his name on January 6, 2021, the ones who earned themselves that bronze statue of Nancy Pelosi's desk on the National Mall that briefly memorialized the physically repulsive and scatological nature of their actions inside the Capitol. I mean, the argument now appears to be in Republican circles not whether Trump is going to issue pardons to people who took part in that attack on the Capitol, but just how many pardons he's going to issue. Will he pardon them all, or will he just pardon some of them? That has led publications as diverse as the Huffington Post and the Wall Street Journal editorial page to try to front page, to try to resurface the details of the crimes for which some of these people were convicted, to try to make it seem, even to Trump, even to Trumpist Republicans, like maybe these convictions were sound and should stand. Quote, Andrew Tate pepper-sprayed police officers defending the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and hit one with a metal whip. He is serving 74 months at a federal prison in Beaumont, Texas. Christopher Alberts carried a loaded 9mm pistol onto Capitol grounds that day and hit police officers with a wooden pallet. He's serving an 84-month sentence at the federal prison in Milan, Michigan. Stephen Cappuccio held his cell phone in his mouth so he could beat an officer using both of his hands, including with the officer's own baton. He's doing 85 months at the federal prison in Forest City, Arkansas. All three will be back on the streets if Donald Trump, the man who incited them and some 2,000 others to attack the Capitol in the first place, follows through on his oft-repeated pledge to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. Of those serving a year or more in prison, a full 57% are there following a conviction in cases involving an assault on a police officer. In all, 83% serving a year or more were convicted of committing an act of violence, which means that with few exceptions, the only people Trump could release from prison with his pardons are those who attacked a police officer, possessed weapons or explosives, or were convicted of some other violent felony. Are those going to be the ones he springs? Here was the deeply conservative Wall Street Journal editorial page today. It's titled, Trump's Pardon Promise for January 6th Rioters. Does it include the ex-meth trafficker who brought a metal baton and swung it at police? Quote, on December 20th, a prison sentence of 48 months was given to a 31-year-old man named Joshua Lee Atwood, who pled guilty to assaulting law enforcement. He emptied a can of pepper spray at police, beat them with a pole, and pelted them with objects such as a metal scaffolding pipe. He yelled that the cops were pieces of... The prosecution's sentencing memo says his criminal history includes a pending felony case for an alleged 2023 stabbing. On December 17th, meaning last month, a 60-month sentence was given to Michael Bradley, age 50, who apparently went to the Capitol on January 6th with his own metal baton in a hip holster. He swung it at police more than once. His list of priors includes a 2002 conviction for meth trafficking. Also in December, a 24-year-old man got 9 months for having thrown an equipment container lid that beamed a cop, causing momentary loss of consciousness and a suspected concussion. A 41-year-old man who wore body armor on January 6th pled guilty to scuffling with police, including trying to seize an officer's baton while shouting, "Come out here, B-word." Other active cases include accusations of ramming the police line, punching cops, and walloping riot shields with a baseball bat. The Wall Street Journal editorial page continues, quote, this was the brutal reality of the Capitol riot that many want to forget. Pardoning such crimes would contradict Mr. Trump's support for law and order. Oh, and it would send an awful message about his view of the acceptability of political violence done on his behalf. Now, as I mentioned, this is the Wall Street Journal's editorial page, deeply conservative. I would take issue there with their characterization of Mr. Trump's support for law and order. He has repeatedly praised the idea of violence in his name for every year that he has been in public life. And so I would take issue with that. That said, that last line I read there from the Wall Street Journal is absolutely correct. Quote, it would send an awful message about Trump's view of the acceptability of political violence done on his behalf. The acceptability of political violence done for him, in his name. This January 6th, yes, we have got very blunt evidence of the profound difference between the Democratic Party offering democratic competition, win or lose, and the Republican Party's threat of violence to hold power. And yes, there is also the unnerving and occasionally unsettling fight to remember what actually happened, to be real about how disgusting it all was, while the Trump movement and the Republican Party and the conservative media tries to say the January 6th attack was really just a bunch of heroes who were so peaceful and loving, and they've just been wrongly persecuted for doing nothing wrong. The effort to remember and to stick to the truth of what happened there and not be gaslit and lied to that it was some sort of day of love and peace is unnerving and unsettling and, yes, occasionally hilarious. But there is also a very instrumental and practical question at hand. this January 6th, which is what happens to the future of political violence in our country in the very short term, in like the next year, if the people who committed violence on Trump's behalf are sprung from prison by him and celebrated as vindicated heroes who did nothing wrong, starting 2 weeks from today when Trump takes office again. Think about this in big picture terms. Why does a leader who celebrates violence against his critics and his enemies want not just a government, not just the state to do his bidding? He also wants his mob. He also wants his paramilitary groups, people who have proven themselves willing to commit violence on his behalf. Why does he want the mob? Why does he want his paramilitary groups? Why does he want his violent ex-cons? He wants to set them all free at the start of his presidency so they can do what for him? The idea that there is permeability between violence and politics, that an incoming president might want a deniable, non-government violent force that he can activate or direct to do his bidding, that what is supposed to be civic hallowed ground might be fouled by rioting and looting and people doing what they did in Trump's name on January 6th. That is supposed to repel us and disgust us indelibly. We are never supposed to acclimate to that. But the Trump side has, and this artwork was temporary. And so now, this January 6th, what should we be prepared for next, with 2 weeks left before he's back in power?